Hi, everyone, and I think we'd rather be drinking coffee than actually talking about it.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, exactly. So
No blue bottle in Redwood City. That's the problem.
yeah, we got to
Go
open
San
it.
Mateo.
Brian's going to be shopping for real estate after this to find a spot for Blue Bottle Coffee around here.
Yeah.
Good. Well, thanks everybody for coming. Bryan, I want to start with kind of the introduction and talk a little bit about your journey before Blue Bottle, because as the introducer said, this was your third startup. And maybe start way back when you launched Fresh and Wild in London. How did you kind of get into the entrepreneurial journey? And obviously it's very different than the classic sort of tech startup in Silicon Valley, but how did you think about entrepreneurship and what brought you into it and why 3 times?
I think you read a lot of books, a lot of stuff on Audible now. You listen to entrepreneurs, and it definitely starts as a child. So you think about, I know your parents very well, and I know your dad, and I know the influence he's had on you. And it's the same with my dad. He was an orphan at the age of 8, and we came from a very, very poor family in Ireland, no money, and he felt that the only way he could survive, having been through the recession in 1979, was to start a business for himself. And then because I grew up in that household, I helped my dad every summer, every day with an import company he had. Went to college and paid for my way through college by working with him. Most of my friends were, I kind of regret this a little bit, they were all off on their J visas in the States having fun, and I was sort of going around Ireland in my Renault 4 trying to sell car parts. But I do think it starts as a child, and what kind of upbringing you've had and what kind of exposure to entrepreneurship you had. But I decided that I took a job at Guinness just for the training after college. But then I quickly started Fresh and Wild. After doing business school, I thought there was a great opportunity to bring Whole Foods. I'd seen Whole Foods in the US. There was nothing like that in London. Started Fresh and Wild with another friend of mine from Colorado. And I just think if you're assessing in the audience yourself about, is this right for me? I just didn't want to work for anybody. I wanted to work for myself. And I had this ambition, but I think the driving force was just the feeling that I wanted to control my destiny and to just be creative myself rather than working. I'd worked for, at that point, 4 or 5 years for Guinness, which is now Diageo. And I just knew that wasn't the environment for me.
Mm-hmm. Now, the first 2 companies you started, Fresh and Wild and Nude Skincare, your ideas, you were the founder, or part of the founding team, right? Blue Bottle was a little bit of a different journey. And just as a sidebar, Bryan and I met because we were neighbors in London, and he actually moved back to California before I did. And it turns out he discovered Blue Bottle. So why don't you take the story from there?
Yeah, so I actually, it was my wife, Tara, at the time. We'd been living in London for about 10 years. And she just said, we've got to do something different with our lives. And I had this skincare company called Nude, which would allow me to launch in the US and get a visa and come over and live here. So I got an L1 visa. At the time, we were selling Nude to Louis Vuitton. This is maybe a year before I sold it to Louis Vuitton. I would just take the ferry I live in Marin in Belvedere, into the ferry building. This is back in 2009. And I just saw this coffee company that I had this thing that I would never meet someone at Starbucks for my whole life. If they asked me for a meeting at Starbucks, I kind of wrote them off. I just would not meet anyone in Starbucks because I just hated the.
That would mess up half my day, I think.
Yeah, I am a retailer, and I love design, and I love authenticity. And my background has been in starting companies that kind of questioned the market leader. So Fresh and Wild was sort of questioning conventional food. Nude Skincare was questioning, the big cosmetics companies because Nude had no chemicals in it. And so I always would look out for the smaller specialty coffee store. And I just came across Blue Bottle in 2009 at the Ferry Building, or 2010, around that time. And what intrigued me about Blue Bottle was the coffee was delicious. They had that incredible logo, but I couldn't remember the name of the company. And James Freeman, as the founder, started by Blue Bottle by he's one of these people who just doesn't like anything, any kind of communication, nothing. He hates obstacles, and he wants people just to see the product. So I couldn't even find out what was the name of this company. But I would love their coffee, and then people would say, I'd say, Mike, I'll meet you. What's that coffee place in the Ferry Building? A great coffee with that blue logo. And the fact that I didn't know the name drew me to it. I was just pulled in by the people and by how delicious the coffee was. And then one day that year I sold Nude skincare, and I saw an article about Stumptown selling to TSG, and they mentioned Blue Bottle and James Freeman. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm just going to call this guy up and see, what he's doing and where he's taking Blue Bottle. And I emailed him, and somehow he answered my email and told me later that he gets millions of emails all the time. And somehow he just found my email interesting. And I met with him, and he said, look, I'm with the Kohlberg, Jim Kohlberg from KKR, his son. They had taken a third of Blue Bottle 2 years prior, and Jim is telling, this is James telling me now, Jim is saying, I can't grow this business myself. At that point, it was 2011. They had...
How many stores?
5 stores, about 12 million in revenue, and a wholesale business and a digital business. And he said that this business, I'm being told I can't run this myself. I need a partner. And then you emailed me, and I saw your background, and I kind of think it's fate. And he had this test where I met him in Oakland, and they had the kitchen in the back, and he said, I want to bring you into the back to meet people. And his test of checking out someone was, when I went in the back, did I say hi to the person who was, to the porter? Did I say hi to the person making the cookies? Was I respectful? Did I say please and thank you? And I did, apparently. I can't remember. But he said, I like that guy, and I like his background. He took me to see Jim, and Jim said to James, he's the guy. So then I said, James doesn't act quickly, but I put an offer in to buy the business for about $15 million. And James took about 3 months to respond, because like a lot of founders, he just retreats and he thinks about it. But he came back to me and he said, we had breakfast at Boulette's Larder. He said, when I got your offer, I cried. I never thought my business would be worth $15 million. But I can't accept your offer. And so I went back to him with an offer for $18 million, and he said, yes, okay.
Okay. Good negotiation.
But it was a good negotiation.
But let me just go back to your thinking for a second. For someone who's been an entrepreneur and started their own businesses, at least 2 of them, what was your consideration about joining somebody else's business? I mean, you sort of somewhat bought his business. He was still an active shareholder, probably the largest one, if I'm not mistaken.
He had 51%.
Right. So what was that like?
So I'd done 2 startups, and I have to say they weren't incredibly, compared to startups that you're used to, they weren't failures, but they weren't, they have great brand names, but, Fresh and Wild was sold for $40 million. Nude skincare was sold for 35. They were okay, but I had found the business of the startups incredibly hard work, and I found it draining just to get to the first $1 million was the hardest thing in revenue. And then I sold Nude, and I thought, I'm going to buy a business. It's so much easier. I'd been doing real estate at that point too. It's like so much easier to buy a piece of real estate, get a tenant. You get this income coming in and it's stable. Why don't I buy a business that's already 10 years old and then take it from 15 million in revenue to 100? And then at that, in my mind, that when I was coming, I actually approached you for money. I think the business plan said, we're going to buy Blue Bottle for 18 million, we're going to sell it for 100. That's kind of the business plan. But I actually think on reflection, it is easier to take a business from 15 million in revenue to 100 than it is from 1 to 5. I don't know what your view on that is.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the thing that drew us, because obviously, at Index, we tend to be a tech investor, so it's not like we do a lot of coffee businesses. But the thing that was clear is that whatever formula they had, which I want to ask you a little bit more about, but whatever formula Blue Bottle had at the time, it was working.
Yeah.
And so the issue was, can you kind of keep the same spirit, the authenticity of it, and scale? And scaling is a formulaic activity. Inventing a brand, much, much harder, right? Which is, I suspect, sort of the magic in what you saw, like
Yeah.
the twinkle in the blue bottle eye, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, for people in the audience who who wanted to repeat, I think that's a great insight, which was James Freeman is a genius. Like, no one could have created what he created in terms of the brand, the positioning, the timing. And I suppose my skill was taking it from that, recognizing that and taking it to the next level. And looking back on it, I probably wasn't the great startup entrepreneur. I did some interesting stuff that made a difference, but I don't think my skill was in startup. So I think that's a good insight for people.
Yeah. Now, 5 stores, and then last year, you sold a big chunk of the company to Nestle for an undisclosed amount, and it was a much bigger success, I think, than your prior successes, if I'm not mistaken. So let's start with the 5 stores to the 20 stores. One of the things that's kind of iconic about Blue Bottle is its true authenticity to the brand. It doesn't try to be a chain. It's not a Chipotle's. It's not a Sweet Green. How did you kind of think about maintaining that core of what Blue Bottle is, but at the same time, turning it into a scalable business?
It's really hard. I mean, I took the decision at the time to go in as chairman and keep James as CEO, because I felt that it was important to have the product guy CEO at that point. And I think that was the right decision. I think if I had gone in as CEO at that point, James would have I think he would have felt demotivated and resigned. And I think that kept him at the helm. But to recognize that, that James was a product guy and he wasn't interested in business. And so what I was able to do was, luckily we found this guy, David Bowman from Stanford. It's not David from Stanford, it's David Bowman. And he went, he was just graduating from Stanford, but he chose to come on and join the team. And what I was able to do with him was to give him the responsibility of putting all the business processes in place to allow us to grow, but allow James the authority to keep product in charge, which I think worked up until a point. I mean, it's not healthy, but it worked up until about 2015, where I stepped in as CEO, just because there comes a point in a business that if the CEO isn't focused on the business side of things, it's not healthy. And I think when you think about the founders who have ended up being great CEOs, I think they need to have a good understanding of business and a great understanding of the product. If you don't have either of those, I don't think you can be a successful CEO. But I think the success of it, looking back, was actually keeping James in that role as long as we could.
Yeah. And I assume you felt like James, not just in terms of his product talent, but really represented the brand itself, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you Google Blue Bottle Coffee, it's James. And the secret, as if you were coming into a company and I was on my 3rd, so I wasn't on my 1st. I didn't need to establish myself from an ego point of view. I didn't need to be doing the press interviews. I think it's really important to just know who's the person who's going to be the best spokesperson, the best face of the brand for internal and external. And was James.
Yeah, we see a lot of these, right? You see like Emily White over at Weiss at Glossier, or Sophia at Nasty Gal, which was a tougher story, that one.
Yeah.
But what's your sense? Do a lot of these founders that are kind of in your sector, right, in this brand, fashion, retail, et cetera, sector, should they be looking for a partner like you?
I think, go back to what I said earlier on, like if you think, the Emily Sophia point of view, I think if the founder is open to learning, like you don't expect the founder, especially this founder didn't come from a business school background or an academic background or business background. This founder came from product. But if you have a founder that's really genuinely interested in the business side, I think it's important. But if you ever come across a founder who's not interested in talking to the finance team, or not, Steve Jobs had a bit of that too, but just not even interested in saying hi to anyone except the product team, that's dangerous.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about, I think most of us that are Silicon Valley people, we think of building software businesses that don't have like physical real estate and building. Your business was largely a physical business. You had stores, people walked into them, people made coffee, et cetera. Talk about what's tough about that.
I kind of get very envious of software companies just in terms of their ability, you know, when it's right, their ability to scale is unbelievable. It's really hard. Like right now, we're gonna have 90 cafes by the end of this year. Minimum wages are going up in California, in New York. We're in full employment. It's really hard to hire people right now. So we're very much a people-driven company. Real estate prices are going up. The complexity of the business is hard. Someone said to me about retail, it's the type of business that gets the better of good people. And so sometimes you can have a business model that's so good, you can have an average manager running it and be successful.
Yeah.
In retail, if you can have the best management team in the world, and the model is so complex, they're still not going to succeed. And so I would say, looking back at Blue Bottle, we were lucky because the complexity is high. And I think for anyone in the business is to understand, like, how complex is your business, the chance of you failing is extremely high.
Yeah.
And I would just say that Blue Bottle is not a model for every aspiring entrepreneur because it's, the chance of success is extremely low. Whereas you could probably talk about, 2 or 3 other businesses out there where you probably have management teams. You're not going to mention the teams, but the management teams, that can be just good to great and still be incredibly successful.
Yeah, that's true. Definitely. I mean, the capital requirements of the business and then the massive amounts of people management that you have to do, right?
Yeah.
So another thing that you did unusually is that you took relatively early on venture capital in a retail business, which is also, it's, I guess, a little more common these days, but certainly very unusual when you did it. What were your considerations there? What did you want from your source of capital?
So I had 2 other companies where, Fresh and Wild, I did have private equity, and they were sort of B-grade private equity companies. In Nude skincare, it was with Bono and another partner, and we funded ourselves. I realized that part of the success of Blue Bottle, in hindsight, but at the time, was if I went with the Mike Volpis of this world.
Come on now.
And True Ventures.
I paid him to say that.
But there is no doubt about it that with whom you invest is more important than the deal. And it took me 10 years to learn that as an entrepreneur. But by signing up you guys and True and Google and a host of other incredible people that got involved in Blue Bottle in 2012, it just set us apart from everyone else. There was something about, like, we had a brand, and now we enhanced our brand by connecting ourselves with the best investors in the world who, when I think about also, you were on our board, Tony Connor's on our board, the input that we had from you guys at a board level and the support we had and the doors that were opened, there was just something like a snowball that was rolling down a hill that just suddenly became very big. And it's hard to articulate that, but there's no doubt about it that it makes a massive difference.
And what do you want from a board member? Now that you've experienced it 3 times, you've seen it, what do you look for?
What I look for is someone who's there to give me advice, but someone who's going to support me with my decision. So a lot of board members think they know what the answer is and what they need to do, and they spend a lot of time with the entrepreneur working with them to get them to their point of view. But I think the best board members are ones who recognize the entrepreneur, are there for them to give them advice, can coach them. When I think about, there was a time where we were about to acquire Tartine in 2014 or something. We decided not to do it. I called you up on a Sunday. We took a walk on at the ferry building. You spent 2 hours just listening to me and giving me advice. It was that kind of availability and support. It's mentoring, basically. But too many board members are ego-driven and want their opinion and think, I know how to run this business better than you.
Yeah, well, listen, interestingly, as a venture capitalist, a lot of people think that our job is about making deals. And actually, the funnest part of the job is taking a walk with you and talking about the business. And most of the time, you actually know the answer already. I'm just holding up a mirror and letting you see it.
You're a coach. You actually are an amazing venture capitalist, but the reason you're an amazing venture capitalist is because you're an amazing coach. Good.
We're almost out of time, Bryan, but I do want to ask you this. You obviously, you scaled the business. I think it was 60 stores when you sold it. Are you happy with your decision? And do you have a good life now that you're somewhat part of a larger organization?
It was an amazing decision. The Series A investors got 16 times their money when you guys invested. It was an incredible deal. Also, competition has increased. The market's got harder. You know, we talked about labor, etc. It was definitely the right decision to make. And most importantly, Nestle, who took 68% of the business, have allowed us to, part of the deal of doing with Nestle was like, you have to leave us alone, you can't interfere without my approval. And they've actually they've given us capital, they've allowed us to grow without interfering. So that was the third business I'd sold, and I'd learned from the other two how to do it. And we have an amazing relationship. And to answer your question, am I happier? Yes, but I'm working harder than I ever have.
Where's your stress level relative to the days where you were running it on your own as
it's
an
a different kind
independent
of stress. It's gone from, like, I don't have to go around raising money anymore, but it's a different stress of, I tell you where my core stress is my legacy to my people and my guests. Like some of my guests, Blue Bottle guests, felt we sold out, and I promised them that nothing would change. I promised my team when we sold that we were going to get better. And like one example, Nestle have just announced a massive environmental program which is leading the food industry based on some conversations they've had with me and Blue Bottle of like what they need to do to improve. So we're impacting them as much as they're impacting us.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Let me ask everybody to join me in thanking Bryan for the great conversation and the great coffee. Thank you, Bryan.
Okay, thank you so much. Cheers.